Keanu Reeves walked down the busy city street with a quiet step. He wore old jeans, a plain jacket, and carried a worn backpack over his shoulder. He looked like a man who had seen hard times. His face was calm, his eyes soft, but his appearance did not shout money or fame. People rushed past him, not paying much attention. Some looked at him twice, wondering if they had seen his face before. But the thought vanished as quickly as it came. Two police officers standing near a luxury store noticed him. One of them nudged the other and whispered something with a grin. They both laughed quietly at first, then louder. They thought they had spotted just another homeless man wandering too close to a place where expensive cars stopped and rich shoppers walked in and out. They crossed their arms and watched him. One of them smirked and said loudly enough for him to hear, "Hey, buddy, lost your way? You looking for a shelter bed?" Keanu stopped, turned his head, and looked at them. His face remained calm, his lips pressed together. He did not answer. The officers chuckled more. One of them shook his head and said, "Maybe he thinks he belongs here, carrying that old bag. Look at those shoes, probably found them in the trash." Their voices were mocking, sharp enough to sting. Pedestrians nearby slowed down. A few of them frowned, recognizing the man under the plain clothes. One young woman gasped, whispering to her friend, "That's Keanu Reeves." Her friend squinted and then her eyes widened. But the officers didn't listen. They only saw what they wanted to see. To them, he was just a stranger who didn't fit the shine of the street. Keanu could have spoken then. He could have raised his voice. He could have said who he was. But he chose silence. He let the officers laugh. He kept walking slowly, his steps steady. His calmness almost looked like defiance. It made the officers even more eager to push him. One officer took a step closer, tilting his head as if examining him. "You don't talk? What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" He sneered. The other one laughed again. This time it was loud, echoing against the glass windows of the shops. Their laughter made some people in the crowd shake their heads. Others pulled out their phones, recording the scene. Still, Keanu stood. Without anger, his silence carried a strange weight. The officers did not know what to do with it. They wanted a reaction. They wanted him to beg or explain. But he only looked at them with a calm expression. His eyes showed neither fear nor shame. He looked like a man who had learned long ago not to fight over pride. The young woman who had recognized him whispered louder now, "It's him. It really is Keanu Reeves." A few others turned, their eyes widening as recognition spread. A man in the crowd pulled out his phone and quickly searched for a picture, holding it up against Keanu's face. His mouth fell open. "Oh my God. It's really him," he muttered. The officers noticed the whispers but shook their heads. "Yeah, right, Keanu Reeves. Out here dressed like that? Don't make me laugh," one of them said, waving off the idea. Their mocking tone only grew stronger. They leaned back, confident in their judgment. But the crowd had changed. People began to gather. Some looked upset, others shocked. The laughter of the police now felt out of place. It clashed with the quiet dignity of the man they mocked. Keanu still hadn't said a word, but the weight of the moment was shifting. His silence was no longer weakness. It was strength. It was patience. The city lights glowed above. Cars honked in the distance, and yet everyone nearby felt the sharpness of the scene. Two men with uniforms and power were laughing. A humble man in plain clothes stood calm, and those who recognized him realized the truth. This was no ordinary man. This was a world-famous actor, a man known for his kindness, a man who had given away millions quietly. And yet to these officers, he was invisible. They saw only the jacket, only the backpack, only the worn shoes. They could not see the dignity, the history, the respect that came with the name Keanu Reeves. The tension grew thicker. Every laugh from the officers now sounded cruel. Every step Keanu took seemed heavier. The crowd waited, whispering, their voices growing louder. Some hoped he would speak. Others wanted the officers to realize their mistake. But for now the scene was frozen in that uneasy balance. The police mocked. The crowd murmured, and Keanu stood silently, carrying himself with a grace that none of them could understand. It was only the beginning. But already the city street had become a stage, and everyone there was about to witness something unforgettable. The police officers kept laughing. They thought they were just having fun, making jokes at a man who looked poor, but they had no idea who they were really talking to. Keanu stood there quietly, holding the strap of his backpack. His clothes were old, yes, and his face looked tired, but his silence had power. One of the officers walked closer and said with a smirk, "Do you need food, old man? There's a soup kitchen not far from here," the other added. "Or maybe you want a cardboard box to sleep in. Looks like you've been living in the street for weeks." They both laughed loudly again. Keanu didn't move. He didn't even blink. He just stared at them with calm eyes. His body was still, like a mountain that doesn't react to the storm. He wasn't angry, but the people watching could feel something change. Something deep and serious was building quietly. The young woman who had recognized him stepped forward. She raised her voice. "That's Keanu Reeves. Are you blind?" she said. The officers looked at her and chuckled. "Yeah, right. Keanu Reeves doesn't walk around like this, don't be silly," one replied. The woman held up her phone, showing a picture of Keanu from a movie. She pointed. "Look at his face. Look carefully. It's him." One officer leaned forward and stared at Keanu's face. He paused for a second, his smile faded just a little. But then he shook his head. "Nah, just someone who looks like him. Maybe you're confused," he said, trying to keep his pride. The crowd began to grow larger. More people were stopping. Some were recording with their phones. Others were whispering to each other. "Is that really him? Why are the police treating him like this?" "This is wrong," they said. The air started to feel tense, like a string pulled too tight. Keanu still hadn't said a word, but his silence was louder than shouting. It made people uncomfortable, not because he looked weak, but because he looked too calm, too patient. He had every reason to speak up, to tell them who he was, but he didn't. Instead, he waited, watching. The police officers were starting to feel nervous. They noticed people filming them. One officer whispered to the other, "Maybe we should back off just in case," but the other replied, "Nah, let's keep going. He hasn't said anything. If he really was someone important, he would have told us already." So they kept going. "Look," one of them said to the crowd, "even if he was Keanu Reeves, what's he doing here? Dressed like that? Stars don't walk around alone like this. This guy is just trying to get attention." A small boy in the crowd pulled on his mother's sleeve and asked, "Mom, is that John Wick?" His mother looked closely and gasped. "Oh my God, it really is," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but the moment she said it, everyone around her turned to look again. One older man stepped forward and said, "Sir, are you really Keanu Reeves?" Keanu finally nodded slowly, just once. The man turned to the officers, his face full of anger now. "You laughed at this man? Do you know who he is? Do you even care?" The officers stepped back. The energy around them had shifted completely. People weren't just curious now. They were upset. They had seen enough. Their phones were still recording, and some had already gone live on social media. Still, Keanu remained calm. He raised one hand slightly and said softly, "It's all right." His voice was gentle, but the crowd fell silent. Everyone wanted to hear him speak now. One officer, trying to fix the situation, said quickly, "We're sorry, sir, we just didn't know, you understand, right?" But it was too late. The damage was already done. The videos were already being shared. Keanu looked around at the people, not with anger, but with understanding. He could have shouted, he could have called his lawyers, but he didn't. He just nodded and said, "Next time, maybe listen to people before you judge." The crowd clapped softly. Some people even had tears in their eyes. They had seen a man stay silent while being mocked, and when he finally spoke, he chose kindness. The officers looked down, embarrassed. One of them whispered, "Let's go." And they walked away without another word. Keanu didn't smile, but there was a quiet strength in his face. He turned to the crowd, gave them a small nod, and continued walking down the street. People followed him with their eyes, not because he was a celebrity, but because they had just seen something rare, a man who didn't let pride or anger control him, a man who turned insult into grace. And even though he said only a few words, those words stayed with the people long after he had disappeared into the crowd. Keanu Reeves kept walking slowly down the sidewalk. His steps were calm, almost quiet, as if nothing had happened. But behind him, people were still whispering. Some looked at the videos on their phones. Others called friends, telling them what they had just seen. The two officers who had mocked him had disappeared into a side street, embarrassed and silent, but Keanu didn't care about revenge. He didn't smile, didn't show anger, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he simply continued his walk, like a man used to carrying the weight of the world in silence. He stopped near a small bench outside a closed bookstore and sat down. He opened his backpack and took out a bottle of water. He drank slowly and looked up at the sky. The clouds were thick, and the sun was hiding behind them. The world felt heavy, but he looked peaceful. A few people hesitated before walking up to him. "Mr. Reeves," a young man said softly. "I'm sorry about what happened. That wasn't right." Keanu looked at him and nodded. "Thank you," he replied, gently. The young man smiled awkwardly, then walked away. Others followed, quietly offering their respect, but Keanu stayed humble. He never asked for attention, never pointed fingers. He didn't post about the incident on social media. He didn't even mention the officers' names. For him, it wasn't about being right. It was about showing how to stay calm when the world becomes unfair. But people around him were not ready to let it go so easily. A woman who had filmed the whole thing posted the video online with a caption, "Police mock Keanu Reeves thinking he's homeless. Watch what he does next." The video started spreading fast. Comments poured in. People were shocked, angry, inspired. Some couldn't believe it was real. Others said it made them respect Keanu even more. "He's a saint," one person wrote. "The fact that he stayed so calm is just amazing." Another said, "News outlets picked up the video within hours." Meanwhile, Keanu stayed seated, quietly reading a small paperback book from his bag. His phone buzzed a few times, but he ignored it. He didn't want attention, he just wanted peace. But peace was now hard to find because his silence had become louder than any headline. Back at the police station, the two officers were called into a room by their supervisor. The video had already reached the higher-ups. "Do you realize who that man was?" the supervisor asked sternly. One officer looked down, the other tried to explain. "We didn't know, sir. He looked like a homeless guy," he said. The supervisor didn't smile. "And so that gives you the right to mock him?" he said sharply. The room went quiet. They had no excuse. They had judged someone based on looks alone, and now the whole country was watching. The department's public image was under fire, and people were demanding answers. But Keanu had not filed any complaint. He hadn't contacted lawyers or given interviews. Instead, he quietly made a phone call. Not to a news station, not to a celebrity friend, but to a contact at the Department of Justice. He had known someone there from a past charity event. He explained the situation in simple words. "I don't want to cause trouble," he said on the call. "But I think something should change, not for me, but for others who can't speak for themselves." The person on the other side listened carefully. They took notes, and they promised to look into it. Keanu didn't want the officers fired. He didn't believe in revenge, but he believed in responsibility and growth in justice that teaches instead of only punishes. He asked if training could be improved, if officers could be taught better ways to handle such situations, especially with the homeless and poor. The Department of Justice took his words seriously. Within days, meetings were held, videos reviewed, policies discussed. What had started as a cruel joke was now turning into something bigger, a real chance for change. And yet Keanu still didn't talk to the press. He didn't post any statements, he just went back to his usual life, helping strangers, giving quietly, living simply. The world watched all this in awe. Many celebrities would have shouted, demanded apologies, called out names, but not Keanu. He had shown the world something far more powerful. That real strength is not loud, it's not angry, it doesn't need a spotlight. His silence that day had spoken louder than any speech. His calm face had broken the pride of two arrogant officers, and his gentle voice had reached the highest levels of justice. And yet, when people saw him again the next day, he was dressed the same, walking the same, sitting on the same bench, sipping the same bottle of water. Because Keanu Reeves wasn't pretending to be humble. He wasn't playing a role. That's just who he was. A quiet man with a loud heart, a star who didn't need to shine to be seen. The video of the police mocking Keanu Reeves was now everywhere. People from around the world were watching it on their phones, laptops, and TVs. The clip was short but powerful. It showed the officers laughing, making rude comments, while Keanu stood calmly with his backpack, saying nothing. By morning, the video had millions of views. Fans were outraged. Journalists were calling it a moment that reveals everything wrong with judging by appearance. Hashtags like #respect Keanu and kindness matters were trending across social media platforms, but the police officers didn't realize the size of the storm coming. They had no idea that the world was watching. Their names were not yet public, but people were demanding action. Comment sections were filled with words like shameful, disrespect, and unprofessional. Still, Keanu had said nothing to the press. He hadn't given a single interview. Instead, he showed up the next morning at a local food bank, dressed just like before, same jacket, same jeans. He volunteered there once a month, helping pack boxes, carry bags, and smile at strangers. He didn't need cameras to feel important, he just wanted to help. The food bank staff had seen the video too. They greeted him with warm smiles. One worker said, "You handled it like a true hero." Keanu shook his head. "I just stayed quiet," he said softly. Sometimes that's louder than yelling. Outside the food bank, a small crowd was waiting. Not paparazzi, but regular people. Students, parents, workers who just wanted to say thank you. Some brought flowers, others brought letters. A little girl held up a sign that read, "You're my hero, Keanu." He stepped outside for a few minutes and greeted them, shaking hands, taking photos, never rushing anyone. One older woman hugged him with tears in her eyes and said, "I was homeless once. I know how it feels when people look at you like trash." Keanu looked at her and said, "I'm sorry you had to go through that. No one deserves that." Meanwhile, at the police station, the mood was tense. The officers had been pulled off duty. Their chief was furious, not just because of the video, but because of the department's image being damaged. They sat in a room filled with silence, waiting for their review. One officer finally spoke. "I didn't know who he was." The other added, "We thought he was just some bum." Their supervisor looked at them with cold eyes and said, "That's the problem. You saw a man and judged him in seconds. That man could have been anyone. He just happened to be someone the whole world loves." Outside the police station, protest signs began to appear. People weren't just angry because it was Keanu. They were angry because it could have been anyone. Someone poor, someone homeless, someone alone. And most people don't have millions of fans to protect them. Back on the street where it all happened, someone had placed flowers on the bench where Keanu sat the day before. A handwritten note was taped to the bench. It read, "To the quiet man who taught us to listen." Later that day, Keanu met with a small group of community leaders, activists, and youth workers in a local center. They sat in a circle, no reporters, no fancy suits, just people who cared. Keanu listened more than he spoke. When he did talk, his words were soft but full of meaning. "I'm not here because I want to punish those officers," he said. "I'm here because what happened to me happens to others every day. They just don't have a camera around when it does." The people in the room nodded. Some shared stories of how they were treated unfairly because of how they looked or dressed. Keanu listened to every word. Sometimes he looked down, his face serious. Other times he gave a small nod of encouragement. He then offered to help fund a new training program for police officers in the city. It would focus on empathy, respect, and how to deal with the homeless community, without judgment. He didn't want his name on it. He just wanted it to help. Someone who might get mocked like he was. Word of his actions spread fast. News stations were now reporting not just the video, but what he was doing afterward. "Keanu turns pain into change," read one headline. "From mock to mentor," read another. People online kept sharing their own stories in response. Veterans, single mothers, runaway teens, all telling the world how they had once been looked down on because they didn't have clean clothes or fancy shoes. Keanu had become more than a movie star to them. He had become a symbol of silent strength. Yet, through it all, he never changed. The next day, someone saw him on the subway again, sitting alone, reading a book. Nobody would have guessed that just days before, he had changed the lives of thousands by doing nothing but staying calm and being kind. Because for Keanu, it was never about revenge or attention. It was about reminding the world of something very simple. Never judge a person by what they wear. Judge them by how they act. And sometimes the quietest person in the room has the loudest message of all. The police officers who had laughed at Keanu Reeves were now facing the pressure of the world watching them. Their faces were not shown in the viral video, but their voices were clear. Their words had echoed across the internet. And now, the whole city knew something had to be done. Inside the police station, the atmosphere was heavy. The two officers sat in a meeting room, quiet and tense. They had been suspended from street duty and were waiting for what would happen next. Neither of them spoke for a long time. One finally whispered, "We messed up." The other nodded, "Big time." But outside, something else was happening. Keanu wasn't sitting still. He hadn't gone into hiding or taken a vacation to escape the attention. Instead, he made another quiet visit, this time to a youth center that helped at-risk teens. It was a place he had supported for years without ever telling the public. When he entered the center, the staff and kids were shocked. They had all seen the video. They couldn't believe that someone so famous and calm had been treated like that. A teenage boy named Darren approached him and said, "If that happened to you, what chance do we have?" Keanu looked at him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "That's why I'm here," he said. "We're going to change how people think." He sat with the kids in a circle. They talked about how they had been judged for wearing hoodies, for having tattoos, for not speaking perfect English. Keanu listened closely, never interrupting, never checking his phone. Later that day, he made a phone call, not to a lawyer, not to a reporter, but to a quiet office inside the Department of Justice. The woman on the other end was someone he had met at a charity gala years ago. She remembered him right away. He explained the story calmly. "I don't want lawsuits or noise," he said, "but I believe this moment could turn into something better." The woman agreed. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said. Keanu spoke about an idea. What if this incident led to real training for officers, not just rules in a book, but face-to-face talks with real people from the street? Real stories, real lessons. A program that taught not just what to do, but how to feel, how to listen. The woman at the DOJ was impressed. She promised to take the idea forward. "You don't even want your name on it?" she asked. Keanu smiled. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about every person they didn't recognize because they weren't dressed nice." Meanwhile, the video was now on national news. Talk shows discussed it. Famous voices spoke up. Even some retired police officers made statements online, saying the behavior was wrong and embarrassing. But still, Keanu stayed away from interviews. His fans wanted him to speak out, but he remained focused on action, not noise. Back at the police station, the two officers were asked to watch the full video, this time with no talking, just watching. They saw their own laughter, their mockery, and Keanu's silence. When the video ended, a senior officer asked them, "Now what do you feel?" One officer's voice cracked. "Ashamed," he said. "He didn't fight. He didn't even insult us, and we treated him like nothing." The department decided not to fire them, not yet. Instead, they would be the first two officers in a new training program. They would attend every session, hear from real people, and even meet Keanu face-to-face if he agreed. When the message reached Keanu, he paused. He didn't like public confrontations, but he understood the power of teaching through presence, so he agreed on one condition. "They don't need to say sorry to me. They need to promise they'll never do it again to someone else." The next day, in a quiet room at a community center, the officers walked in nervously. They were not in uniform, and they looked different. Less proud, more human. Keanu was already there. Sitting with a notebook in his lap, they stood in front of him, unsure what to say. Keanu broke the silence. "You don't have to explain," he said. "I know how fast the mind can make assumptions. I just hope this teaches you to slow it down." One of the officers swallowed hard. "We judged you for your clothes, not your character," he said. "We were wrong." Keanu nodded. "That's a good start," he said. For the next hour, they sat and talked, not about fame or money, but about how it feels to be invisible, how one bad moment can change someone's life, how power must be used with care. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't blame. He taught through presence, through humility, through grace. And as the session ended, something quiet and powerful had changed. The officers shook his hand with real respect, not because he was famous, but because he had shown them what leadership really looks like. Outside the center, the sun was setting. People walked by, unaware of what had just happened inside. But those who were there knew. They had seen a lesson not from a teacher, but from a man who chose kindness when he could have chosen anger. The next morning, the world woke up to something different. The story of Keanu Reeves was no longer just about a video or two police officers making a mistake. It was becoming a movement. People everywhere were sharing their own experiences of being judged by how they looked. Some were homeless, some were immigrants, some were just ordinary people who had once been treated like they didn't matter. And now they were speaking out, not with anger but with hope, because they had seen someone famous, someone powerful, go through the same thing and still choose peace over revenge. Keanu didn't talk much about it. He still walked around the city in his usual clothes, still took the subway, still carried his old backpack. But now, people looked at him differently. They didn't just see an actor. They saw someone who had stayed quiet when insulted, who had listened when most people would have shouted. At a small press conference arranged by the Department of Justice, officials spoke about a new training program for police officers. It was created with Keanu's help but without using his name. They called it the Listening Project, and its goal was simple: to teach officers how to slow down, observe, and treat every person with dignity. Reporters asked why Keanu wasn't there to speak. A woman from the DOJ smiled and said, "Because he didn't want to be the face of it. He wanted it to be about the people." Behind the scenes, Keanu was already working with social workers and community leaders. They were planning workshops, role-playing exercises, and story-sharing events. He would sometimes sit in the back of the room during these meetings, taking notes quietly, only speaking when needed. At one such meeting, a former homeless man stood up and said, "I've been treated worse than an animal on the streets, but when I saw how that man handled those officers, I felt something change inside me. I realized maybe I don't have to carry this anger forever." Keanu walked up to him afterward and shook his hand. "Your voice matters," he said. "Don't stop sharing your story." Meanwhile, the two officers who had laughed at him were going through every part of the training. It wasn't easy for them. They had to listen to people describe real pain, real fear, real humiliation. At first, they sat stiffly, arms crossed, eyes down. But over time, something started to shift. In one session, a teenage girl told the group how a police officer once made her cry just because she was sitting alone at a bus stop. She said, "I didn't do anything wrong, but he looked at me like I was already guilty." The room went quiet, and one of the officers lowered his head, ashamed. Later, he told the trainer, "That could have been my sister. I get it now." Keanu never missed a session. Even when he wasn't talking, his presence made people feel calm. One officer said, "He doesn't act like a star. He acts like a teacher." Word of these changes began to spread again. News stations that had first shared the video now ran news stories with headlines like, "Keanu's calm leads to reform," and "From laughter to learning. How one moment changed a city." Still, Keanu kept things simple. He never gave big speeches, never blamed the officers, never called for anyone to lose their job. Instead, he used every moment as a chance to teach, to build, to connect. One evening, Keanu was seen handing out sandwiches at a night shelter. He wore the same jacket, same jeans, no cameras, no interviews, just quiet service. A young boy at the shelter looked up at him and asked, "Are you famous?" Keanu knelt down and said, "I act in movies, yeah." The boy looked confused and said, "Then why are you here?" Keanu smiled and said, "Because people matter more than movies." That line spread online like wildfire, a simple sentence, but full of meaning. It made people think, made them pause before judging someone by clothes, accent, or skin. Back at the police station, the officers' behavior had started to change. They were more patient now. They asked questions before, jumping to conclusions. They didn't look at people and assume the worst. The chief noticed and called them in. "I don't know what that man said to you," he told them, "but I can see the difference." They nodded and one replied, "He didn't say much, that's the thing, he just made us feel what we were doing wrong without yelling." It wasn't just the officers, the whole department was watching and learning. And it all started with one man who didn't shout, didn't sue, didn't fight. He just stood there and let the truth speak louder than noise. By now, people in other cities were calling to ask about the Listening Project. They wanted to try it too. They wanted to change the way their officers saw the public. And Keanu? He kept walking those same streets, still kind, still quiet, still reminding the world that being strong doesn't mean being loud. Sometimes it means being still, being calm, and letting kindness do the talking. The Department of Justice had seen many cases over the years, but this one was different. It didn't begin with violence, didn't involve crime. There were no courtrooms, no shouting, just one quiet man who had been laughed at, and who chose to respond with calm and kindness. Inside the DOJ building, people were talking. Emails were flying between offices. Everyone had seen the video, but what shocked them most wasn't the behavior of the police. It was the way Keanu Reeves had handled it. He never complained, never posted online, never said a single angry word. Instead, he made a phone call, sat in a few meetings, and slowly helped change the system. Senior officials began asking questions. How can we support this new training? What else can we learn from this? Can this be a model for other cities? One of them said, "If a man like Keanu Reeves can be treated that way, imagine what happens every day to people who aren't famous." Soon, the Listening Project wasn't just a city idea anymore. The DOJ decided to expand it to 5 more states as a trial. They reached out to Keanu again, this time asking if he would join a private Zoom call with key leaders. Keanu didn't hesitate. He said yes, but only under one condition. "This call isn't about me," he said. "It's about fixing something that's been broken for a long time." During the call, he sat in a small room with a simple background, no fancy lighting, no assistants, just him and his notepad. The officials welcomed him warmly. One of them said, "Mr. Reeves, we are honored to have you." Keanu gave a small smile and replied, "Thank you, but let's focus on the people who don't get welcomed like this." He spoke about the day the officers mocked him, not with anger, but with honesty. He said, "I knew they didn't recognize me, and that's okay. But what hurt more was how quickly they laughed, how quickly they decided I didn't belong." The people on the call listened closely. Some of them had worked in justice for decades, yet no one had said it like this before. So simply, so human. Then Keanu said something that stayed with them. "I didn't call you because of what happened to me. I called because this happens every day to someone else who can't make that call." One of the DOJ members leaned forward and said, "You've given us a clear message. This isn't just about police. This is about the heart of how we treat each other." Keanu nodded. "Yes," he said. "It's about respect. It's about not assuming. It's about seeing the person, not the clothes." After the call, the DOJ announced official support for the training program. They agreed to fund it in more cities, help design better materials, and collect real stories from real people. Keanu refused payment or credit. "Just let the work speak," he said. Meanwhile, the 2 officers who had started all of this were still attending sessions. But now something was different. They weren't just learning. They were helping teach. They stood in front of new recruits and shared what they had done and how it had changed them. One said, "That moment could have ruined our lives, but instead it taught us more than years on the job ever did." Some young officers looked uncomfortable hearing the story, But they listened, and that was the first step. At the next session, Keanu visited again, quietly sitting in the back. As the session ended, one officer walked over and said, "I used to think kindness was weakness. Now I know it's the hardest thing to carry." Keanu smiled softly. "It's heavy sometimes, but it's worth it," he replied. The media had caught wind of the DOJ involvement, and the story was now on every news channel. Headlines read, "Keanu's calm leads to national change," and "Famous actor sparks reform without saying a word." Even late-night talk show hosts mentioned it, making jokes at first, but ending with admiration. "Only Keanu can fix law enforcement with a backpack and silence," one of them said. But for Keanu, none of that mattered. He still walked the streets in the same clothes, still rode the subway, still stopped to help when no one was looking. One afternoon, he passed by a group of kids spray painting a wall. They stopped when they saw him, unsure of what he'd say. Keanu looked at the wall, saw the words "We All Matter" in big, colorful letters, and nodded. "Nice work," he said, and kept walking. The kids stood there stunned. One of them whispered, "That guy's different." And they were right. He was different. Not because he was famous, but because he chose the harder path, the quiet path, the one where you don't fight fire with fire, but with patience. Because sometimes all it takes is one person to stay calm in the storm, one person to make a phone call, not for themselves, but for others, one person to say, "This isn't about me," and then do something that helps everyone. And that one person, in this story, was Keanu Reeves. It had been a few weeks since the video of Keanu Reeves went viral. The moment that started with two officers laughing at him had now become something far greater than anyone expected. The world had watched as a quiet man, treated unfairly, turned the whole situation into a lesson, not with anger, but with grace. Across the country, police departments were starting to talk about change. The Listening Project was now active. In over 10 cities, more were asking to join. Community leaders were being invited to speak at training sessions. Real people were sharing real stories, and officers were learning not just with their minds, but with their hearts. But Keanu never stood on a stage to accept credit. He stayed behind the scenes, guiding gently, checking in on meetings, visiting centers, listening to people who had no voice before. When reporters asked for interviews, he politely declined, saying, "The spotlight should be on the work, not me." One day, Keanu walked through the same street where everything began. The luxury shops, the glass windows, the same sidewalk, but this time, something had changed. As he passed the corner where the officers had laughed at him, he noticed a small plaque on the bench nearby. It read, "Kindness is stronger than judgment. In honor of the man who reminded us all." Someone had placed a single white rose beside it. Keanu looked at it for a moment, then gave a soft nod. He sat on the bench for a while, watching people walk by. Some recognized him and waved. Others walked past without knowing who he was, and that was okay with him. A young girl approached shyly, holding a notebook and a pen. "Sir," she said nervously, "can I ask you something?" Keanu smiled gently and said, "Of course." She asked, "Why didn't you get mad when they laughed at you?" He looked at her, his eyes calm and kind. "Because getting mad doesn't change hearts," he said, "but listening does." She wrote those words down slowly, as if they meant something very big, and maybe they did, because for her, and many others, that answer would stay in their minds for years. That evening, Keanu visited the youth center again, the same one where he had first spoken with at-risk teens. They welcomed him with cheers and smiles. Some of the kids had drawn pictures of him. Others had written poems about respect and kindness. One poem said, "He didn't yell, he didn't fight, but still he showed the world what's right." Keanu read it quietly and thanked the boy who wrote it. "That's beautiful," he said. "Keep writing. Your words can change the world." Later that night, Keanu sat with a small group of kids around a table. They ate sandwiches and talked about dreams. Some wanted to be artists, others wanted to be teachers. One boy said, "I want to be a police officer, but the kind who listens first." Keanu smiled. "That's the kind the world needs," he replied. The next morning, something unexpected happened. The two officers from the incident arrived at the youth center, not in uniform, but in regular clothes. They had requested to speak to the kids and share their side. Keanu had agreed. They stood in front of the room, nervous but honest. We made a mistake, one said. We judged someone by his looks, and that was wrong. We didn't see a man, we saw a story we had made up in our heads. The kids listened, some with crossed arms, others with curious eyes. Then the second officer said, that moment changed our lives, and it's because he didn't fight back, he didn't try to shame us, he just stood there with dignity. After they spoke, there was silence for a few seconds. Then one girl said, at least you're trying to be better. The others nodded, and just like that, the room filled with a new kind of hope. Keanu walked up to the two officers and shook their hands. Thank you for coming, he said. This is where healing starts. Outside, the sky was golden with sunset. Kids played near the sidewalk, laughing and chasing each other. Keanu stood watching them for a moment, then turned to leave. As he walked away, one staff member at the center said quietly, he came here a stranger, got mocked in public, and still left this city better than he found it. And it was true, the incident could have ended with anger, with lawsuits, with fights. But instead it ended with growth, respect, and a new beginning for everyone involved. Keanu never wanted to be a hero. He never wore a cape, never gave long speeches. But through his silence, through his calm, he reminded people that strength doesn't need volume, that kindness can change systems, and that listening, truly listening, can start a wave of change the whole world feels. And even when the cameras stopped rolling, when the news cycle moved on, the seeds he planted stayed behind, growing quietly in the hearts of those who saw him not as a star, but as a man who chose to be good when it mattered most. Because sometimes, the greatest act of kindness is simply choosing not to become like those who hurt you, and instead becoming someone who heals the world.